Hello, I'm Dr. Jodie Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. I honestly don't think my conversation with today's guest could be happening at a time when I needed it more, and I wonder if you'll feel the same. We're talking today about rest, and I'm very excited to introduce our wonderful guest. But first, I have a few questions for you to ponder. When do you rest? How restorative is the rest that you get? And if rest isn't an important part of each day, or dare I say each week, what would it take for you to make it a priority? Our guest today is Octavia Raheem. She is a rest coach, a yoga and meditation educator, an award-winning author, a speaker, wife and mum, who says she came to rest kicking and screaming because her life depended on it. Octavia, a very warm welcome to Well, Hello Anxiety.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here.
It's really joyful to have you with us because I know that this is a conversation that so many people need to hear, and I am at the front of the queue. In an interview that you did with the delightful Mark Williamson from Action for Happiness, you said you came to rest from working yourself to bone deep exhaustion. I feel tired just even saying those words. What happened?
Oh, yes. So, what didn't happen? Meaning it was a point in my life where I'll just describe my typical day at this point where I came to rest kicking and screaming and bone deep exhaustion. That's a poetic way of saying I had a medical crisis. But my day looked something like getting up at 4 a.m., barely eating and drinking, going to work out, really intense workout for an hour to 90 minutes, running back home, taking a quick shower, eating a quick breakfast, driving quickly to my full-time job, which was being a public school teacher, doing that for 8 to 10 hours, leaving that place very quickly, going to my second or part-time job. That was being a hot yoga, power yoga teacher in a room where the temperature was 90 to 100 degrees, doing that for 3 to 4 hours, and then convincing myself that I hadn't done enough. So I would stay and work out or do more at the place of employment. And then I'd find myself driving home around 11:30 p.m. at night. I'm a public school teacher. Maybe I try to like read a paper, grade something, get in bed, do that over and over and over again. And then you would think, well, what does my weekend look like? Though I didn't have the full-time job happening on the weekends, I would take on extra side projects, take on extra classes, substitute for other people, do a workshop, lead a train, do all of these things. And so if you looked at my calendar then you would go, when's this woman sleeping? And if you were listening, you might even go, when's she actually like nourishing herself, eating? When's she fueling and drinking? And I was in this loop whereby I worked so much and did so much and worked out so much that it caught up with me, and especially the working out part. And I ended up with this condition called rhabdomyolysis, which is a rare condition where your muscles are breaking down rapidly. It can lead to kidney failure, all of these things, but it's a condition that the population it is most common in is ultra marathon runners. So here I am, a regular woman out here living my life at the level of intensity of an ultra marathon runner itself. The thing I've learned, because I'm actually really fascinated with ultra marathon runners, is that as intense as their workout schedule and their regimen around their physical demanding I don't know what to call it, hobby or work, being a runner
Yes.
is they are so intentional about their sleep, their care. Like the ultra marathon runner really understands that in order to ask that much of themselves, they have to give that much to themselves. So
Yes.
the difference in my condition and conditioning was that I'm living my life like an ultra marathon runner without the proper care and nourishment to meet the demand I was placing on my life. And so I often say my devotion to rest was conceived and began to be born in a hospital bed where I lay with rapid muscle breakdown, severe dehydration, and within inches of my life, but did not know it, right? I didn't know it because even the morning that I ended up hospitalized, I was gonna drive myself to work. It's like, "I have to go to work," and my partner was like, "But you don't seem okay," and I'm like, "But I have work to do."
Yes.
And he said, "I'll drive you to the hospital," and I said, "I don't wanna be a burden to you. I don't want you to have to change your schedule for me. I'll drive myself." So here I am in a condition where like I feel dizzy. I'm just not well, yet I drive myself to the hospital. And so I'm sharing all of this to just paint the picture of the level of disconnection between my body, my mind, my heart, my spirit, and my sense of self worth beyond working and doing and producing and doing all the things for all the people. And then also layer in my complete inability to ask for and accept help. And so all of this comes to the most terrible head in the hospital room, and I think that nurses are some of the most incredible people on the planet. And I had this one nurse who, beyond just administering medicine to me, I like to say she ministered to my spirit because she asked me how'd I work my body into the condition I was in. Because on paper, I was presumably at my most fit, the closest to what's this BMI body met whatever, all of my numbers looked right in air quotes, yet I had landed myself in this positioning. And she said to me, "Do you know this scripture from the King James version of the Bible, which is Psalms 46:10?" And she said, "Do you know what it means to be still and know?" And I grew up like Southern USA Baptist. I knew that scripture, and I just started sobbing because A, she didn't have to, she kind of stepped out of a bound. She said, "I'm going to speak to more than your physical condition. That you are in a mental or spiritual crisis." And also this be still and know was inviting me into something that felt so foreign, so scary to me, this idea of being still, but yet it's coupled with this word of be still and know. The rest of that scripture is know that I am God. So she was inviting me into this stillness, a place of knowing, and invoking at the same time my need to learn what it meant to surrender to something, some force greater than myself, be that God, the God of your own understanding, be that a practice, something else, because up until that point, I was clearly subscribing to the church of exhaustion, to the church of rest, you know. And so I like to share that story because my experience doesn't have to be anyone else's experience, yet I also know that so many struggle with a sense of self-worth beyond what they can do and produce and perform for others. And I know that so many people are living at the edge of pure exhaustion, even if they won't have a physical collapse for it on the inside. They're battling with this need to pause, rest, and be, yet also this other voice that says you're lazy if you don't, the guilt and the shame that comes up when we rest. So that is how I came to be. That's part of the story of how I came to be a teacher of rest. And what I mean when I say kicking and screaming and dragged to it, I was, right? That's not every rest teacher or rest coach's testimony. For me, it wasn't easy. I had to learn, and that's why, and my book is Pause Rest Be. My second book is Pause Rest Be, because the prerequisite to a deeper relationship with rest is really relationship with the pause.
Mm.
You know,
It is, and I know that you, as a practitioner, feel very strongly about supporting anyone that you connect with to start to put something into practice. And I wonder if now might be a lovely time for us all to take a pause and for you to start to teach us how we can start at that point on our journey to rest.
yes. I love that. Before we hit record, we were talking about how we can read about rest, we can talk about anything until we're blue in the face. And at some point, we have to have an embodied, practiced, or practical relationship with it. And so, a step before pausing is actually paying attention to the pace that you are moving at, paying attention to the pace that, say, you're talking at, and then being intentional about slowing that pace down a half a beat. Right? And so that's my first invitation, is to notice what you're doing, and can you slow that down? It might be imperceptible slow down to an external eye, but you know that you shift gears a little bit. That goes without saying that if you're driving, you're going to be really mindful and keep paying attention to the task at hand, which is driving. Then after you've slowed down, if you're talking or moving, whatever, even if you're walking and listening to this, you slow down a little bit. My next invitation is to slow down even more and then move to a place where you can pause. So I don't invite people to, the feeling of, no one does this, I'm sure, drive 100 miles per hour, right? But if you're driving that fast and then you slam on the brakes to a pause, it's very jarring. And so I invite people to titrate, to switch gears slowly, and then come into a place of pausing. And then notice your body. And what I mean by notice your body is notice where your feet touch the ground, where your hips touch the chair, where your hands are in space, where your hands touch your body. You can scan your body from top to bottom, left to right. And what I mean by that is just to notice there's an arm, there's a shoulder, there's a hand, and to take a moment and do that. And then just to become aware of your breath. And aware of breath, another way I like to say that is just to pay attention to breath, to notice the touch of the inhalation as it enters the nostrils, and perhaps to notice the temperature of the exhalation as it leaves the nostrils. And then you do that for a breath or two, just noticing the texture, the actual sensation of the inhalation and exhalation. And then get a little bit more intentional with your noticing of the inhalation. So inhale and notice what comes after the inhalation. There's a natural and organic pause. And then exhale and notice what comes after the exhalation, another pause. And so we notice the inhale, which is a moment of movement, but then we notice right after the movement there is a necessary and organic pause before the wave of breath turns and becomes an exhalation, and then there's a pause. So then you do that 2 or 3 breaths. You inhale, notice the pause, exhale, notice the pause. Inhale, notice the pause. Exhale, notice the pause. And this last time we'll inhale deeply and fully, but without straining, right? Just let the breath be full, yet easeful. And then perhaps exhale with a sigh. And if your eyes were closed, you can open them. If you kind of unfocused your eyes, you can refocus them. And you just take a moment to notice and feel. That might have been 2 minutes, right? But that's what I mean by by and we can notice that even we shifted. Like, I was guiding this short pause practice, and it shifted me. I feel more grounded, more present, more settled, and perhaps you do too. Yet even within that short pause practice, what we were practicing is something called pause breath. If you don't have 2 minutes, because sometimes that's the truth, you're like, I cannot do that for 2 minutes. Can you just notice the pause between the breath, right? Just keep doing whatever you're doing, but still notice the pause between the breath. So I share that as hopefully an accessible place for people to begin to cultivate a relationship with the pause that can lead them to a deeper relationship with longer space to rest and be restored.
I think that that's a really important differentiation because it doesn't always have to be hours out of the day. It doesn't have to be a large portion of our calendar. It can be moments peppered through the day where we set a reminder or we on the start of every hour or we're making a cup or when we're going to the toilet, whatever reminder you might need to take a momentary rest. And the pause breath that you guided us through, and I was following your instructions, I do feel more centered. I do feel more grounded. I'm possibly even speaking more slowly. And it's so powerful, even for just a short pause. And yet you mentioned it a moment ago, and I'm sure that there are people listening, listeners who are thinking, but I can't stop. I can't stop. I have to keep going. And I'd love for you to speak to that idea that we are from the Church of Exhaustion, as you put it before, and just this idea that more is better and that this reluctance to stop and pause for fear that, and I don't think it's even articulated, that we might not be enough, do enough, achieve enough. And it's impacting people not only in terms of their physical health, but their mental health and their presence with the people around them. Why is it so hard to rest?
That's the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? And I think it is the question. And even as a rest teacher, restorative teacher, and rest coach, a part of what I teach and share with people is the power of inquiry, the power of self reflection. And I would invite me, you, the listener, to ask themselves, what do I know for myself about this question? Why on earth is it so hard to rest? And be with that answer. Right? You name the fear that comes up, the I'm not enough, I'm going to miss opportunities. And as you ask this question, why is it so hard for me to rest? Right? I think we have to put in the me because it might be very different for each person depending on their family of origin, their cultural norms, how they've experienced systemic oppression. Like, there are so many factors that can start to be woven into the patterning and conditioning that creates what I call the rat race, and the way you or your listener runs it for themselves. What I've seen is what you named, though, is this fear of I'm gonna miss out, I'm not enough, I have to prove my worth, I have to always be performing. If I'm carrying a load and I put it down, then someone else is gonna have to carry it. And some of these things can be true, yet they're not true all the time, right? And they might have been true at one period or season in life, yet they're not true for every single season. And what I find and see a lot of in my students and clients is that there's a mode of operation that worked to, because I work with a lot of visionary leaders, founders of organizations, activists, and change makers in the world. And are people who have Ivy League level education and all of these things at the top of their game. And what got them to those places might be one way of being. And then they enter a new season, and that very mode of operation might be the thing that could undo them, become their ultimate demise. I was one of the first people in my family to go to college, and that was a level of insistent, persistent relentlessness that got me to that place where I could be that. And even as the terrain shifted, I didn't shift my pacing. I didn't shift how I was working, living, or responding to the moment. And the new environment, those same patterns and behaviors and habits ultimately began to undo me. And so so that's some of it. And I believe it's for each individual to say, why is it so hard for me to rest? Because then we're going to we might arrive at, well, my mother or father taught me this. But then we might ask the question, well, why was it so hard for them to rest? And then we're going to get a new layer to the answer. And then if it's like, well, our great grandmother, and then you go, well, my family immigrated to this country. And, like you start to get to the layers. And for me, these inquiries around why is it so hard to rest always land me down to the marrow of having more self compassion for my condition and other people's condition. And because it's very easy to go, why am I this way? I'm so tired, but I won't stop and I won't quit, and to not be kind to the self, right? And so that's some of what I've seen in terms of why it can be so hard for individuals to rest. And I'd like to, if we were playing tennis, to bounce that question to the listener. Why is it so hard for you to rest? And to invite them to first do the pause breath, and then to, with the utmost kindness and compassion, just start to walk tenderly in that inquiry for themselves, because the answer to the question will not reveal an individual flaw. Like, you are not the flaw, you are not the problem. There are so many forces that have conspired in our collective fatigue and exhaustion. And is how I know and just really trust that one pause breath at a time, one rest practice at a time, we can start to undo the entanglement we have with this distorted relationship to working and doing.
It really is. It's a question for a lot of people, I think, around boundaries and this idea that the workday can really be 24/7 because of technology. We're so connected. And it really is up to us to put the boundaries in place and to put away our devices or to put them on silent or disable our notifications or set a time, 6 p.m., for example. I don't work after 6 p.m. And that teaches other people who work with us, and I don't work in an organization. So I say us loosely, but if we are responding to emails at 11 p.m., then perhaps that will become an expectation. But I did see a beautiful email from somebody who sent me something at a really early hour of the morning, and I didn't see it until it suited me to be on my laptop. But it said, I'm sending this at a time that is convenient for me. Please respond at a time that is convenient for you. And I thought that was really sweet.
Yes, I love that. I've heard of boundaries that stated that they're not for the other person to know what to do necessarily. It's for you. It's for you to have and maintain the awareness of what's the boundary for you, and for you to also consider when that boundary is tested, crossed, just disregarded.
Mm.
The real work is like, now what? How do I respond to that? Is definitely much easier now than ever to have zero boundaries around work and around it, just engaging. I have an office in my house, and I also work. Sometimes I work for myself, right? So I also will sometimes work outside, or I'll work in my dining room, or I'll even sit and work at my couch. And one thing I am really aware of is that if I leave my computer in my office there, because it's like downstairs, like I have to like do
Yes.
some maneuvering to get back to it, you know. So if I'm like a personal boundary for me is the actual place I place the device, like I leave my phone in my kitchen at night,
Yes.
like they think little things like that, they start to make a huge difference until we have the inner discipline and boundary to honor it. Sometimes the physical location of things can really support us in maintaining a boundary.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree entirely. And it's role modeling for the people around us. We're both mums. We both have children, and I fear that last night, and the irony, you heard my introduction, and I was having a chuckle with Octavia before we hit record, that I am personally feeling extremely overwhelmed with a lot of things that I need to get done by certain dates at the moment. And I worked all day yesterday presenting at a school, 4 different presentations. It was a really rich and joyful day for me, but I'm running on adrenaline all day. I came home and my husband is away for work. And so I'm talking to the kids, doing dinner. Then I sat down to do some more work. And at 11 o'clock, my teenage son sort of wanders out, pokes his head around the door in the next room. And he said, "Oh, Mum, I was just wanting to check on you if you were still watching TV. I think it might be time to go to bed." And I love that. I thought, how thoughtful and kind. And he must have seen the light on if he got up himself. And that him witnessing me working till 11 is not the role modeling that I want for my kids. There are times when that's necessary, and last night it was necessary. It's not typical for me, but we I think it's really important that we do it for ourselves, but in doing it for ourselves, we're starting to teach the very special people around us how important it is too, aren't we?
Hmm. This is true. And I love what you said, that there are times when it is necessary, right? Because I want to underscore that the challenge we run in kind of societally is when we start to live like every single thing is urgent and every single day working until midnight or 11 p.m. is necessary, right? Because that is not true, right? And it leaves the scale tipped in a direction that it only starts to like point down, right? Like you can't it's that's a lot to carry for too long.
Yeah.
And I think, a beautiful thing about parenting is I really want to model to my son how to access the discernment to know when, like, yes, this is what's required of you. I don't know, 9 p.m., let's just say a time is required of you, and how, though, to dance more harmoniously and seamlessly than it does seem to appear for adults to do between effort and ease, right?
Mm,
Because I'm also a yoga teacher, and right, and then the asana or physical practice, the dance we are dancing is, say, like a warrior two. Like you need to anchor the feet, you need to engage the body, and can you access ease in your breath as you do all of that, or can you maintain and hold this really strong posture with also excess of ease? And I think that's like teaching and modeling, like how to be in discernment of that is important, right? Like the workday needs to have a start and an end,
yes.
right? There might be seasons of Like, I'm a writer, and book launch season has a very specific cadence and rhythm to it that is not my non-book launching season, though.
I
Right, and
hear
even
you.
and even I know you know, and so even that though, I'm learning, right? Because I learned when I have those like my June of this year was really I co-facilitated one retreat, and then I led another 4-day retreat, and I had a lot of deep, rich client engagements in between both of those things, and it was like transformational work for the people who showed up to it, so it was a lot of space holding for me, and I loved it. And this month of July, this was 12 months in the making, right? So I knew June was going to be deep transformational work and ultimately a larger lift for me. And this month of July, I left essentially open, right? Like I was like, how do I hold that and this? But also ultimately, as I reflect, right? Because how I invited the listener into like inquiry and reflection, I won't plan another June like this June though. Like it was beautiful because of my own evolution and where I was. A part of me thought it was necessary in living through it and being deeply reflective and honest with myself. Also tells me that it doesn't have to be that way and I can make different choices, right? And some of those choices might look like sometimes people might ask you to do something and then you go look at your calendar and you go, there is no way I can do that when they asked, and I really want to be in community with this person. This is meaningful work. I want to do it. We always have the agency to say, I can't do it this season. What about next season?
Yes,
Right?
yes.
Like, and I'm, and it takes practice to do that because we have a lot of, and I'll say women, I don't know because I've not lived in a male body, but I feel like women, we have a lot of conditioning around like people pleasing and saying yes, even when a part of us senses the answer is no. But I also think part of that is that women we have experiences where our no isn't honored, right?
Mm,
So then we start to dishonor our no, right? And are we even taught like, well, what does no feel like? How do you and so this is layers to the conversation. But even if we think about the cadence of our own work, and just like I rest with women sometimes who the work we do is me helping them look at their calendar and say we're actually not putting anything else on this for 3 months.
yes.
Right, so it's already over full. Like there's a point that you have to shut it down. Like,
Yes.
and because I'm a student and teacher of the both, and I often invite people into the to hold lightly this kind of inquiry truth, like can you trust that you've done enough even if there's more to do? Because the truth of adulthood is that the to-do list is endless. You mark one thing off, two things are added, right? And I'm like, if we actually can make peace with, there's a running catalog of things we want to do and experience, responsibilities, and even obligations. Okay, like when I can accept that, it actually softens me a little bit.
Mm,
And it also then gives me clearer space to go, well, what's really important for right now? And then once I do that, now what's really important for right now? And at some point, what's really important is that I get some rest, right? That I take care of myself, right? You know,
yes. Yeah.
um,
And you're a living, breathing example of if you don't factor rest into your schedule, if it's not an important part of your routine, it's forced upon you. And it's most
mm,
inconvenient when that happens. And it's also quite frightening because you've been through something that was very serious and probably very worrying. And nobody wants to get to the point where they're experiencing bone deep exhaustion and the rest all of a sudden is forced upon you. You've got no control. Everything's off the calendar and you're relying on other people to do other things for you in ways that you would never have said yes to before. And so we really have a choice. I really feel strongly that I'm in the boat whereby I have this conditioning to do more. And especially, I don't know if this is because I work for myself, that I am the person that drives the resource development and the relationship building, and I love it just like you do.
Mhm.
And I do have help. I do have somebody that works for me, and she's absolutely wonderful. But there's only so much that somebody else can do when it's you at the helm. But I think in the long term, if we don't pace ourselves and incorporate pauses and rest and time for reflection and time for celebration as well of our
That's
achievements,
right.
what sort of a life is that?
Yeah, what's the point of that, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And where I've come in my own evolution is just redefining, like shaking off others' definitions and of so we're using this word more, do more. And I think a lot of deeper, go deeper. And this was maybe 20 years ago now. I used to direct a nonprofit program. And I remember we had a board member who kept saying, you need to get more numbers. And we were working with children, right?
Mm.
First generation college students. It's very close to my heart. And kept saying you need more numbers, more numbers. And I was like, well, if we're going to serve more students, we're clearly going to need more adults, more professionals to serve more students. But they didn't want to allocate any funding for more professionals to really do justice and service to the families and students. And then I remember just looking at this person and saying, what about deeper? Like, I want deep, sustainable, long term impact. And I know on your funding roster, right? We could have 500 kids in here, but barely touch them. We could have 100 kids in here and go deeper, and I'm just remembering that moment decades ago because it was this was still pre-rest crisis. I'm still working myself to the bone. Yet that ceiling of a new way of defining success and impact was being born in me even in that moment. And so if I'm gonna say more, I say, well, can you say yes to more space?
Mm.
You know, can we say yes to a little more pauses, right? Like, okay, let's stay with the word that this idea of more, but I don't want to say less is more. But I'm like, what about just more space, right? So that I can so even in my launch season, I'm doing a lot more interviews when I'm launching a book. You know this, right? And I remember the moment where I realized like I really should not be scheduling more than 2 or 3 interviews a day because it was impact negatively trying to do more was negatively impacting the way I was showing up. And I said, well, that's
Yes.
not the point, right? Like that's not the point. This isn't deep presence, right? This isn't really what am I actually doing? So sometimes we're doing more and it truly is like less, like something is diminished in the more.
I couldn't agree more. And I'll never forget the time I arrived at a client's workplace and I had been working hard on developing a series of presentations. And I never feel quite like they're done because I'm constantly learning and so I tinker and tweak to the evening before the presentation. And it's probably part of my anxiety as well. And
Mhm.
I was up reasonably late and there were 4 presentations and I saved the 4th presentation and overwrote the first one because I was tired, right? I
Mm.
wasn't concentrating. I'd hardly rested and I had hardly eaten. I hadn't eaten well. I hadn't nourished myself. And thankfully, I was setting up, preparing, doing the tech check and getting my first presentation. And then I'm like, this is not my first presentation. What have I done? And then I reflected
No.
and I thought, oh my gosh, in those final minutes of that final preparation the evening before I know what I've done. And I was able to revisit back through my files and find a previous version and make some changes, make some updates. And I saved myself, but it showed me it was a moment that could have been not catastrophic. It would have been in my mind, probably not in others' minds, because I could have stood there and presented without the presentation behind me, no problems. But it put me off kilter. It made me feel anxious,
Mhm.
made me feel a little bit underprepared because of this situation I faced. And it just showed me that the point that you just made is so, so true, that the we rob ourselves by trying to fit more in, probably more often than we realize. And if we can stop and think about what's the purpose of what I'm doing, like you said with your interviews, if the purpose of my interview is to calmly, compassionately, articulately convey the book that I'm launching and why I've written it and answer questions, and that's not possible, well, then if you're not able to meet the purpose, then it's a waste. It's not a waste of time, but it's counter to our intention and to what we want for the experience. But
Mhm.
before we finish and people can learn about your wonderful work and how they can connect with you and purchase your books, could you please share with us, just briefly, if listeners are rewinding the podcast and thinking to themselves, I want to go back and do that pause again. I want to do that pause breath again. And that's a practice that they can integrate into their day. But then they're looking to take it to the next step. What would be the next step from the pause breath to start to bring a little bit more pause and rest into one's day?
So Jody, I love a word you introduced here, which is intentionality,
Yeah.
just because why are we doing what we're doing?
Yeah.
and and then just considering, if I hold this intention, are these 20 things I'm doing, what most supports that intention? Like letting that define and refine how we prioritize is actually very powerful.
Yes.
And, so I'm a teacher of restorative yoga, which is deeply supportive and nourishing yoga, and yoga nidra. And so, and I also practice and teach meditation. And so I have the bias that if people want to deepen their relationship to rest, that they choose one of those practices
Yes.
to engage with 10 to 12 minutes a day to start, right? And I have a SoundCloud account that has complimentary rest practices that are in this 3 to 12-minute range that people can access. And also on my website, and I'll actually send you the direct link, is a link on my website called Rest Resources. But from befriending the pause, I would really invite people to one restorative pose a day, which can literally be get you a pillow, get you a blanket, lay down,
Yes.
right? Set a timer.
I'm loving this. I'm loving this.
Set a timer and just breathe. And for some people though, that's hard. Having guidance, like listening to an audio will be better. Or connect to a meditation teacher or find an audio that you can listen to, or if the stillness practices you don't feel quite ready for that, I would invite people to take a walk in nature, but do it more slowly and with more quiet, or if you're listening to something, turn it down. Like just even a simple practice that, when my son was really small, he's 7 now, but when he was like a lab child and it really felt like I was crunched for time and focus, I had this practice of just drinking a cup of tea quietly and not letting that cup of tea get cold. And so
Yes.
and that is 3 to 5 minutes. I'm like, "This is called
Yeah.
this is called tea meditation," meaning this I'm gonna get this moment to myself. 'Cause, like,
Yes.
if you could put a cup of tea down when you're, like, a busy parent and
Yes.
do 10,000 things before you get back to the cup of tea, and now it's cold, right? And so it
Yes.
was just this little, and I feel like I got this from, like, some parenting book I read where this mother was, I can't remember who, I would love to give credit, but just cup of tea, if you're a tea or even a coffee drinker, just don't put it in a cup that will keep it hot. Put it in the actual mug and let your practice be, I'm going to sip this and drink this while it is hot. This is my moment to myself and for myself.
Yes. I love that. And oh my gosh, so many bells are ringing for me at the moment. I think even if I boil the kettle, I'm like, all right, what can I get done while the kettle's boiling? And I need, yes. And so there are moments, I think there are natural moments in our day where we can change the way we look at that time.
That's right.
And if it's the kettle boiling, and there's a saying, and I'm sure you've heard it, and that if you don't have a minute and a half or 2 minutes to stop while the kettle's boiling, then you need to stop for 10 or 20 or 30. It's about the intention. It's about taking care of ourselves. It's about really the way we want to live our life from the larger perspective. How do we want to live our life? And what is it that we want to be present for? And without rest, without pause, without that kind of training of our brain and our habits and our being, we can't be present for the things that are really important. So today's conversation couldn't have come at a better time for me, and it's going to set my day up in a way that it otherwise wouldn't. And I feel much more excited about how I'm going to prioritize my time and my tasks, who I'm looking out for, who I need to be present for. And I really know that the listeners will have taken so much and will be really keen to know how they can connect with you and find you online and work with you or purchase your books.
Yes, I can be found online. I'm OctaviaRaheem.com, Octavia Raheem on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook,
Oh,
right? So it's
so
just my
easy.
first and
Yes.
last name.
Yeah.
And I will send you, if you want to add to the show notes, the direct link to this rest resources that have 3 audio rest practices that people can weave into their day. One's 7 minutes, one's 10 minutes, and one's 22 minutes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome.
And your books are Gather and Pause, Rest,
Yes.
Be.
Yep. And those are respective websites are just the title of the name, except for
Oh,
Gather, but that's on my website as well. So
okay. So through the website, people can link out to your resources. And
yes,
yes, oh, look, Octavia, thank you. This time we've had together has been really empowering for me, really insightful. And I think it's a conversation that anybody who listens to will be moved by to make some change, even if it's very small to begin with. So I'm very grateful to you for your wonderful work and for your time today.
thank you, Jody, for having me.
Thank you. And thank you, lovely listeners. Thank you again for being with me. It's just such a privilege to be with you. And I'd really love to know what you have taken away from this episode. So join me over on Instagram, and I look forward to continuing the conversation over there. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jody Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodyrichandson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.